Hi guys, and welcome to our Cookies Foundation series. My name is Caroline Carver and I'm from Three Black Cats. Today we're going to be talking about cookies and how they affect our global compliance. If you have any questions as we go along, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A. We'll also be recording this session and we'll make it available for people afterwards as well. So before we can start, let's think about the basics of cookies. Now, knowing we're doing this at lunchtime, sadly, we're not talking about the types of cookies that come to morning tea. We're talking about cookies that appear on your websites and in some cases in your apps as well, on your phone. And these are tiny little files that sit in the memory of your device. So they might sit in your computer's device or on your phone's device. Even some can be stored on your Apple Watch, for example. And these cookies are things that exist so that things are remembered about your visit. So quite often they might remember, for example, your login details so that you don't have to log into a website every single time when you get there. They might also do things like save your preferences. So if you have a global site and you can toggle what language you want it in, maybe it remembers that you always want it in that language. Or maybe it remembers your shipping preference, for example. It can also do things like provide functionality. So it might allow you to put things into your shopping cart if you're an online retailer, and then be able to go to the checkout and see what you've got saved as part of your order. So it's literally saving it on that device and then taking it through there. Now, worth saying at this point, if you save cookies on one device, so maybe I put an item in my shopping cart and I go and use another computer, the item will not be in my shopping cart. It is literally saved only on that device and only for the username that logged in at that time. So if three of us share the computer and each of us log in with our own username, it won't be there. Okay. And the last reason we use cookies is for advertising. So if we are a commercial entity, we might want, for example, to know who has visited our website so that we can offer them a different price, maybe, if they came back for a second visit. We might also want to promote Facebook ads to them, Klaviyo, etc. And to be honest, about the split of cookies for a commercial entity will be about 50% functionality kind of ones, and usually about 50% marketing based as a general rule of thumb. And depending on the size of your organization and the complexity of your website, you might have 10 cookies. You might have 2 for a small organization, simple website, up to a couple of 100 cookies for a more complicated website that's got a lot of e-com integration into things like Facebook, TikTok, etc. Now, just to be clear on wording before we get started, there is another thing that can exist on our websites, and that's called a pixel. So a pixel is different from a cookie. A pixel is a little piece of code that sits on our website and it sends data to somewhere else. Okay, so one of the common ones we see is a Facebook pixel. So the Facebook pixel knows you've been on that website, sends data over to Facebook to say you were there, you looked at, I don't know, particular jumper, and it has sent that over to Facebook. So it's not stored on that device, it's literally instantaneous. As soon as that code is called, it will make that communication out. Now, from a privacy perspective, both of them involve different privacy risks. So cookies will be saved onto your websites. You're dropping information. Some will be personal, some won't. And then most probably, in most cases, it's being used, so looked up and used for a purpose, or quite often shared, particularly those advertising ones, the data in them might be shared. Pixels, same deal. It's using information that you are doing at the time and disclosing it quite often to a third party. Okay, so both have privacy considerations we need to think about. But today we're going to talk particularly about cookies. So when we think about a cookie has a couple of features to it. First is a retention period. So not all cookies are born equal. They are either a persistent cookie, which means they remain on your device until a set time period, or they're sessional. So sessional cookie means that it's there until I close my browser and then it's gone. Okay. Or sometimes even until I navigate away from your site, don't need to close my browser, then it's gone for a sessional. So things that can be sessional are quite often that shopping cart cookie, right? If I close the browser having not purchased it, and then I come back 4 hours later when I realize I really did want that item I had been eyeing up this morning, it will no longer be in my cart. I will need to put it back in there, okay? Because it was a sessional cookie that kept it in the cart. As I'd close my browser and come back, it is gone. More persistent cookies are quite often things in that marketing space or security space. So this is a cookie that says this is your username and password or your login credential. Okay, I don't want to log in every time I come back to the website. That kind of defeats the point of being able to remain logged in. So that is something that will be a persistent cookie. Now, persistent cookies have times how long they last for. So some things, for example, might last 2 or 3 months. Maybe you're wanting to know, did somebody look at a particular promotion over a time period? That might be one that you want to set for a couple of months. Other things can be set in years. So things like what language do you want it in, etc., quite often set in years. But everything will have a timeout period on it. And we're saying users themselves can delete their own cookies, and we'll look at how that works in a bit. The retention we're talking about here is the automated side of it. Cookies as well come in two sorts. They come as first-party cookies and third-party cookies. So the party refers to who made it in effect and who's using the data. So a first-party cookie is usually created by the website user, website developer for that company. So it's usually something like that checkout one or the language. Those would always usually be first-party cookies. There's something that's directly related to the site you are on for their business reason. Third-party cookies are ones where the data is going to be used by another party. So they've been created and going to be used by another party. So that is your TikTok one. That is your potentially your Google Analytics one. And we'll talk a bit more about that in later. It's your Bing. It's other ones like that, Facebook, LinkedIn. Those will all be third-party cookies. And one easy way to identify a third-party cookie is quite often what the host name for the cookie is. So as well as the cookie has its own name, it has a host name, which is generally who's put it there, and then it has a retention period as well. And we'll have a look at this in more detail shortly. So once we have worked out our cookies, we then need to think about how we categorize these cookies. So cookies can be categorized, they're usually categorized by the website owner because everyone's business use of them is different. So how you categorize them may not be how your competitor categorizes them, etc. And this makes this hard I'll be honest, because you have to understand your business process of what you're doing with your cookies and why. So we have 4 types of cookies or categories of cookies. We have strictly necessary cookies. So these are cookies that must exist on your website in order for your website to function at its bare minimum, to do the minimum that's needed to transact on it in the main. Okay, so this will be your checkout basket, right? If you are running an online shop, it needs to be able to buy things. So that cookie would be strictly necessary. Quite often, security cookies are strictly necessary. If you don't have it, site won't go. Your strictly necessary cookies, even for a complex website, are usually sort of 5 or 6 maximum. They're not hundreds of them. Okay, so if you've got hundreds of them, likely is it might have gone a little bit wrong. And we're saying just because you can't manage a cookie, and we'll talk about that a bit more in a bit, doesn't make it strictly necessary. Okay, if you should be able to turn it off and you can't, that is not a reason for it to be strictly necessary. We then have functional cookies. So these are optional things on your website that you might want to do. So this is where I can optionally select my language. That is a functional cookie. Okay, I can use your website without it saving my language. Yeah, it's damn annoying that every time I come to it, I have to select I want it in French and it appears by default in English, but I can do that. Okay, same as I can log in every time I come. It's a ball ache, but I can do it. So those cookies for saving my login will be functional. Okay, so think about it as annoying things that would be nice if it did it, but absolutely can, the world will continue without them saving that information. We then have analytics and performance cookies. So they sometimes are called analytics cookies, sometimes called performance. They are the same group of cookies, just depends on which regulator you're looking at particularly. Okay, so this is a group of cookies, quite often that don't have a huge amount of personal information involved in them, that are used to understand user behavior. So this is the cookies that are your Hotjar cookies, for example, that track where somebody is browsing on your website. This is your cookie that does your statistics for how many people visited your website this week, how long did they browse there, etc. It's those sort of cookies. How fast is my website going? Is it crashing? Those ones. Now, you note I haven't talked about Google Analytics, and I said we would come back to this one. Google Analytics is an interesting one. For those of you that have purchased an enterprise license for Google Analytics, Google Analytics is an analytics and performance cookie. The reason being is that you are the only one who can use that data and you are using it solely for your purposes. If you have not purchased an enterprise license for Google Analytics, it will be a marketing or targeting cookie. The reason being, if you haven't purchased the enterprise license, Google are able to use the data about people who have clicked on your website, etc., for their own purposes, as they explicitly say, targeting, marketing, advertising to them on other channels. Okay, so it flips over from being solely for you into that targeting, marketing one. And in that targeting marketing one goes anything else where you're using the data to advertise. So absolutely, that is your Klaviyo, which is one of your products that sees what you're doing and builds a profile of you so that we can segment our customers and market to them. That is also your cookies for all your social media platforms, etc. So have a think about the business process behind them. If you are putting that cookie there for a product that you are going to then use to market to people or to segment them, highly likely it's a marketing or targeting cookie. Okay, and as I said, about 50% of your cookies will be in that group. As a general rule, other than security cookies, most of your third-party cookies will be in marketing and targeting. Okay, they are there to serve someone else's business need, not your own. And that business need is usually tied up with selling data of some form or another. Okay. And the categories you put on them will change. And that's what we're saying. As your business processes change, you might need to move them around a bit. As you re-platform your website, you might want to move stuff around as well. So this is not a hard and fast list of what they are. So to give you an idea of that, let me share screen. So here, hopefully, here is somebody's cookie list. So this is Rip Curls. So you can see here, they have got their strictly necessary ones. Yep, they've got quite a long list. They've got a really complicated website. And then their performance cookies. You can see their Google Analytics here, etc. coming in. And that's what it's saying. The cookies are named weird names. You will have to look them up to work out what they are coming from in order to be able to classify them. So there is things like Cookiepedia, where you can look them up and find out where they are coming from. And then here, as I say, the marketing ones. And you will see the lifetimes here down the side and whether they're first or third party. Okay, so you'll see most of these down the bottom, third party cookies. Okay, so that's the Facebook one there, for example, coming through as a third party cookie. So we need to be able to find our cookies. There is not a definitive list that you can go to your developers and go, tell me what cookies are on my website. Okay, that's not something your developers will by nature have. They might compile it for you, but it's not something they're naturally thinking of. And how do cookies come about, right? So nobody usually wakes up and thinks, you know what, I'll make a cookie today. That's not how this happens. Cookies usually come about either through development work. So your developers are coding a new feature and think, oh, we need to save that information somewhere so that we can use it. Or more likely because you have put an add-in or bolt-on onto your website. Okay, so if you put on, I know, Afterpay, for example, Afterpay as a product will come with a selection of cookies needed for Afterpay to work. Same as if you decide you want Google Analytics on your website and you put the Google Analytics code on, it will bring with it a series of cookies. So it's something you need to keep on top of. It's not a set and forget thing where you can go, oh, yeah, it's all good. I've done my cookie stuff once. Never again do we need to look for it. It will be something you want to be reviewing on at least a monthly basis, usually, to just check things haven't changed. If you've got a huge churn of changes on your website, you're going to want to be looking at it a lot more often than that. Okay, so it is very much up to you. And as the organization running the website, you are accountable for the cookies on it. Okay, so if a third party has put new cookies on through their app that you integrated with, that problem is still your organization's. You are letting them be on your website. Okay, so how do we find these things? There are a series of tools. Some of them are free, some of them are paid, that can go through and scan your website. So in effect, it's a robot that goes through and looks at every page in your website and sees what cookies drop on it. So it just runs through, usually takes an hour or so, run through your website, look what cookies are found. And that's what it's saying. If you only look at your home page, you might find there are more cookies on some of your other pages. So for example, you might have a contact us page, which has way more cookies on it because you're trying to track them for that marketing reason. And maybe you didn't drop them on the home page. So make sure you look at all the pages in your site or a fairly good cross section of them. So we can scan that website. Some of the smarter tools will tell you what they recommend they're classified as. So that's strictly necessary, functional, performance, etc. It is solely that. It is a recommendation. You are going to have to think about and consider how it fits and how it's used in your business. Okay, so don't take it as gospel. What it tells you is true. It is just based on, the population on whole generally classifies this as this particular one. Okay. We could look at the website itself and see what cookies are dropping. And we're going to do an example of that in a minute. Or we could look at if we have Google Tag Manager, what scripts we are calling in Google Tag Manager to be dropping cookies. So Google Tag Manager is a product that plugs into our website and allows us to call various scripts, so those pixels we're talking about, or particular bits of code that we might want, or to call cookies and drop cookies. So we might go through our Google Tag Manager and look for them there as well. Okay, so we've got a few places we want to look for them. So let's have a look at how it looks as a manual test. Okay, so manual in practice. So we're going to use nice New Zealand company, TradeMe. Okay, so any browser, I personally prefer this one. Any of them work pretty much the same way. So usually click on 3 dots at the top and we can go down to more tools and we have developer tools here. So here you see your cookies and here are the sites they are coming off. So in order for us to test it, first of all, we need to know we've got a blank canvas. Right, so first up, we will delete everything we have off our website. I suggest you don't do it off your main browser, only because you'll then not be able to log into anything because you have just deleted every single cookie you have. Okay, so use a different browser to your core one if you're going to test it. So we now see we've got no cookies in here at all. So when we go to TradeMe, we will see our cookies and we will see them appearing here down the side. Okay, so these are all things that have dropped onto my website, onto my device now, and they are sitting here. Okay, so there's we were talking earlier, my Google Analytics cookie, that is there sitting there. And you will see this is what is stored in it. If I click on it, which will generally be some data points. So that will be my unique ID for Google Analytics for my session or my username, etc. Okay. So other ones we can see down this list, if we scroll down, I'm sure we will find some other ones that we can recognize. So this one is an analytics one, PugT, for working out how things are browsed on our website. Now, in here, we can also see how long they're lasting and whether they're persistent. You'd need to expand out those fields here. We can also see here, there is a whole bunch of third-party cookies also being dropped here. So these are all ones that as a result of going to TradeMe's website, all these parties have dropped cookies as well. So this BidSwitch, for example, is a commonly used marketing platform. This is a marketing one as well, ad server. Okay. And again, TradeMe is responsible for all these cookies. They've built them all into their website. And as we can see, there's plenty of them here for it. Okay. If we're wanting as a user, we can delete them. We just right click on them and we can delete them. Okay. So if I don't want it there, I can delete it. Most websites, it will come back. if you delete it. So the minute I delete this, go away, come back, it will be back again. Okay. So that's sort of how you can find them and see what's going on. So if I'm looking to track something, I will see them here. If I am looking for pixels rather than cookies, I will be looking for those in the network traffic. So this is where the website is calling out from the website to get information. So this is all the communication it is doing backwards and forwards here. And it might be doing things like pulling pictures so that I can put them on the website, but it might also be sharing information with other parties. So I saw Criteo appear here. So Criteo is generally a marketing, like a CRM tool. So that will be sending information about my visit to them to say I was here. Hey, look, what are we going to do next? Okay. You will also usually be able to find Meta in there. No Meta for them. Okay. So you can go through, find out what's coming. Oh, there's some Facebook ones, etc. The method here is important. So get means it has pulled something from that provider. Okay. Put means it has sent something to them, or post. Okay, so the post ones are the ones as a privacy professional we're worried about. It means that your website has shared some data with someone else. Now, it might be with your wider self, or it might be with that third party. Okay, so I'll be looking for those posts to make sure we've got them all and we know what traffic we are sharing. So we've now found our cookies. We have understood we have a really long list. The first time you run a cookie review on your website, just be mentally prepared. The list will look long. Okay. It is then an exercise in working out why and working out, do you need them at all? Or have they been left there for history? So quite often we see cookies that, for example, we used to use Google Analytics, we stopped using it, and now we use another tool. I don't know, we use Content Square or something else, but we never took the Google Analytics code off. So now we've got two sets of cookies, one for Content Square, one for Google Analytics. And actually, we just need to do some housekeeping and get rid of some stuff. And as I say, you are accountable for all the cookies on your website, nobody else. So when we say accountable, what's actually required? So in New Zealand, the Privacy Act doesn't have explicit requirements about how cookies are managed. That is considered personal information, and I say not all of them, but a large majority of them would be considered personal information. So there is a requirement, as with everything else, to provide a privacy statement. So usually in your privacy statement, there'll be a section that says something about, when you browse our website, we will collect statistical information about you for improving our products and services, and we might run marketing stuff and give your data to third parties for marketing purposes. Might be quite a common one. Bearing in mind, if you are giving data to third parties for other purposes other than your own, so they're not your vendor, you are giving it to them for their own use. So think Facebook. There are requirements still under New Zealand Privacy Act about disclosure, about it meant to be either for the purpose for which you collected it or for a purpose associated with your business. So do think about whether providing data to Facebook is actually your business. If you are not a data broker, possibly not. But it might be associated with the business. You'll need to work through that. Then also in New Zealand, we have the Unsolicited Electronic Messaging Act, otherwise known as the Anti-Spam Act. So the Anti-Spam Act covers marketing itself. What it doesn't cover, though, interestingly, in New Zealand, is the use of cookies and in-app marketing. So if you're going to send it to my DMs and private message me an advert, then it is covered. But if you're just going to show up an advert on my Facebook feed, then the use of data for that is not covered. Now, this is important because that Unsolicited Electronic Messaging Act is what gives people the option of opting in and out. Okay, so knowing that cookies and stuff are not covered by that is quite important to not having in New Zealand to provide the opt-in and out. And that is why in New Zealand, you will see that we don't consistently have cookie banners on all websites. And that is because it has not got that requirement to have that opt-in, opt-out. It's best practice, but it's not a hard and fast requirement for New Zealand. Now, let's go a bit of a travelling. So let's go to Australia. So in Australia, again, we don't have explicit requirements that say for cookies, it must do this. However, the Privacy Commissioner over in Australia has issued guidance about pixels and how they should be used. So those are not cookies, but that guidance is pretty much stands for cookies too. What they say about pixels, same goes. They have also said this year, as part of their compliance work, they will be looking at organisations and how they are managing their cookies and how they're tracking people on websites. That's part of their compliance work this year. Okay, so you've been kind of pre-warned. They are looking for you. So in Australia, we have to provide people, again, a privacy statement or policy sometimes in Australia, and we have to give a transparent collection notice before we collect the information. So that is where the cookie banners are coming in for Australia, that requirement for it to be before it's collected, okay, being transparent. So they're starting to pop up for that reason. Like New Zealand, we have requirements for not disclosing information outside of Australia. Unless we're sure of the safeguards. We also have requirements about it being for the purpose for which we were meant to be collecting it. Again, definitely worth looking at that guidance and seeing if all your disclosures meet it. Now, more importantly and different to New Zealand, people have the ability under the Australian Privacy Act to opt out of marketing. Okay, and that includes cookies. So it is okay to drop cookies onto their onto their device, but they have to be able to say no afterwards. Okay, so we tend to refer to Australia as an opt-out country for cookie banners. So that means the cookies can be dropped the first time, but if the person then goes, hell no, I don't want this, I want to set my preferences so I don't have cookies, they can do that. And then the next time they come back to that website, or if they've cleared all their cookies and been super good, noting they need to not clear the cookie with their preferences in, then the cookies will not reappear. So if I opt out and I delete the Facebook cookie, that FBP one, and I come back to your website, that Facebook cookie had better not come back. Okay. So we need to give people that ability to say, no, don't want this. Okay, so that's where that banner is coming in Australia for it. And when we say about this, people having the requirement of being able to opt in and out, there is an industry standard that people should be given the choice at any time to change that mind. And that is a requirement in some countries anyway. But also that consent has a time period on it. So the general rule is 1 year that we re-prompt people. So if I say, I'm okay with cookies now, today, this time in a year's time, I should see the cookie banner again appear and go, what do you want to choose now? Now it might be pre-populated with what I chose last year, but it should come back to the surface to sort of ask me, are you sure again? Okay, and it doesn't just sit in the background quietly chugging away. Now, how does that cookie banner usually appear? We're going to talk more about this next week. But usually it's either at the bottom or the middle of your website for that first time you come to it. It will then go away for that year. But if I want to change my settings, there needs to be some way for me to do that. So I need to be able to get back to that banner. So that's quite often why you see that little cookie picture floating down the bottom left, bottom right somewhere. Maybe it's in the footer, change my cookie preferences here. That's where those things usually are. It shouldn't be so hidden that I can never find out how to change my settings. That is not okay. Okay, I need to be able to do it if I want to. Okay, but there isn't that requirement for me to pop up that banner, because God, it's annoying, every time you come to the website. Just once a year, if I've made a choice, that is my choice, leave me be. Okay. In Australia, as I say, it's opt out. So if I scroll, if I move away, etc., then I've deemed that I'm going to take them. That is it. Okay. So let's go to a country that is, or a group of countries that is very much stricter. Okay. So EU requirements. I'll touch on the UK as well because they are similar but subtly different. So EU is governed by two pieces of legislation, GDPR, which is the equivalent of their Privacy Act, and what's called the e-privacy directive. So this is about marketing and cookies, solely really about cookies, tags and pixels in the EU. So the combination of those two pieces of legislation means that in Europe, you must not drop a single cookie that is not strictly necessary before you have explicit consent from someone. So what that means is when I come to your website, if we take that trade example, if I went to their website and I was in Europe, it would literally drop only the strictly necessary cookies. So that's 6 to 10 that are absolutely mandatory for the website to work. It is not that Facebook. It is not that Google Analytics. It is not any save my language. None of those. Okay. If the person then decides that they want all of those extra cookies, they can do that. And they have to be allowed to make that choice, and they have to actually do an action to make that choice. So scrolling off the page is not enough in the EU. I actually have to press something. Has to be able to be given granularly. So I can say, I as a user would like your strictly necessary cookies and your performance cookies, but I don't want your marketing ones and I don't want your functional ones. Okay, it's a weird choice to make, but I'm entitled to make it. Okay. So I need to be able to say, yep, in and out for each of those categories. Now, I might allow you to, for ease of use, to have a button that says accept all. That is perfectly allowed. So there's an accept all button that will drop all of them. So it's a sort of default consents to all categories. However, the other thing that has to be available for the EU is a reject all button. Okay, so it needs to be as easy for me to accept all as it does to reject all. So I need to have that button that says, yep, I don't want this stuff. Get rid of everything but strictly necessary. In terms of those buttons, they have to be equally as appealing as each other. Okay, so the accept all can't be like green and looking super like that's the way to go, and the reject all being red and be like, no, don't come here. Equally, they have to be of similar size so they're appealing. So the accept all can't be 4 times bigger than the reject all. Okay, but there are ways and means of making them slightly more appealing than others within the rules, and we'll talk more about that next week. We also in Europe have that requirement to be transparent about our cookie details. So it's not enough, like in Oz and New Zealand, to say we use cookies for marketing purposes. We actually have to provide that detailed list of exactly what cookies we have and why, which categories they're in. So that is that example we looked at earlier for Ripco. That is them being very transparent about what cookies they have got. Now, this is where tooling really plays a huge part. Okay, you could create a cookie page manually, but as I said, the cookies will change most months, at least a little bit. If you make a manual page, you are going to be updating it every month. Now, if you're in Europe, you might be updating it in 4 or 5 languages every month. It's suddenly become a real work. So that is where tools like OneTrust, Osana, etc., play a big part. They can scan, they can publish, they can keep that list up to date for you at all times on your website. So if you are one of these people who has EU requirements, then absolutely I would strongly recommend tooling for you to get over this one. So let's go a bit further around the world. Head off to the US. Now, US's privacy is different again. US does not have one Privacy Act across the whole of the US. Okay, they have HIPAA, which goes across the whole of the US, but that's about medical information. Instead, what we have is every state has set their own rules for privacy. So some people have a Privacy Act within the state, some don't. About half the states do have rules now, half of them don't. And that changes most months. So at the moment, the US is really fluctuating on what is happening in which states, what are the rules, etc. In the US, for the states that have rules that involve privacy, most of them have some cookie requirements, but they vary from states which have requirements very like New Zealand and Australia. People have to be able to opt out, and that is okay. Up to it is okay for people to be able to opt in, but if they scroll, then that is deemed to be consent. So it doesn't need to be as explicit as Europe. And then we have 2 states where they have the same rules as Europe. It's a hard ass. If you don't click button, you don't get no cookies. Okay. So if you are doing a website for business in the US, you need to think about how you manage each of those individual states' changing requirements. Now, some organizations will talk about, actually, we're going to have one set of rules for the whole country and we'll set it the highest bar. Some people do it state by state, and we'll talk a lot more about that next week. In certain states in the US, we also have to have a do not sell option. So what do not sell means is do not, for financial gain, give my data to a third party. Now, when I say financial gain, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to pay you for it. It might be that you are going to get free service for it. Okay, so example, free version of Google Analytics is free because you are the product of it. You are selling your customers' data to Google to use for their purposes. Okay, so that will be ones that fit into that one. So it might have a do not sell button on your banner. However, what it would normally have is some words that say, you know, if you do not want to sell your data, then opt out of targeting, because that's usually where the sell happens. Users must also be able to opt out. Again, they've got to have that granular choice. However, in the US, there is not a requirement to have that reject all button. Okay. Now, that might sound like, okay, why do I care? If you make it easy for people to be able to select one button, so it's accept all, reject all, versus accept all, manage my privacy, which takes you to another page and you then have to click on each of the categories, you will get more people go accept all. When you have reject all, people are like, oh, actually, maybe I like that option. Okay. And you need to take their consent from the cookie banner and use it as well for your tracking pixels, for your targeting pixels, not just your cookies. So it covers everything on there. Now, the other difference for the US is behind US legislation is also a concept called the global privacy control. So this is a setting that people can decide themselves to make. and it goes into the browser and you say, or you can sign up on certain websites and you say, I don't want marketing preferences. Like my default preferences I want when I come to your website is strictly necessary, yes, functional, yes, performance, no, marketing, no. That is what I want my default to be. When that individual comes to your website, you then need to honor that setting that has come from their browser unless the person says otherwise. So if I've set my global privacy control in your browser settings and I have said no to marketing and I come to your website and it says, look, we've honored your consents from GPC, and I then go, actually, oh, geez, I really do want marketing from this company, I can override it. Okay, that is okay. But I need by default to have the ones I have set in that global privacy control. Now, there's nothing stopping you recognizing that in other jurisdictions as well as the US. Okay, it's available in everyone's browser. You can all go look for it afterwards. So there's nothing stopping you actually recognizing it. And there is actually discussion at the moment in the EU by some of the regulators about if that is actually a form of expressing consent and should therefore be honoured. So particularly in Europe, I would definitely consider honouring it because it is becoming more global as a option. The other one that has always been there as well in your browser is an option for do not track. Okay, and again, if you say do not track, that is the universal, no functional, no performance, no marketing. It's never been written into legislation that you should honour that. However, again, it's about trust and confidence for the end user. If they have gone to the effort of finding do not track in their browser, generally you should be honouring their wishes. Okay, so that's the other one that might come up at some point. So, a bit of a whistle-stop tour around the world of what we have. So where to from here? So the first thing to think about is what cookie requirements relate to your organisation. So am I just subject to the New Zealand Privacy Act? Am I subject to Australia? Or actually, am I a global company and I've got New Zealand, I've got Australia, I've got France, Germany, and 20 states in the US? What is my requirement? We then need to think about how we're going to pull our list of cookies and then how we're going to categorize them. Now, I talked a lot about that consent and allowing people to opt in and out, and we're going to look a lot more about it next week. But there are some amazing cookie banners that all pop up that look like they are fully functional. They've got all the right buttons, all the right words. But regardless of what buttons I push on it, I still get every cookie. Okay, so the buttons are solely for compliance lip service. They're not actually doing anything. If you have a banner like that, do not have a compliant banner. So when you install a banner, it comes in two parts, making it pop up and getting the consents, and then honouring those consents, so taking them through to the various bits of your website, Google Tag Manager, etc., to make sure you actually honour them. So if you are running a cookie banner, I would strongly suggest you go have a look, opt out, clear your cookies, make sure you keep your one that's your consent, opt out and see what cookies you get back. If you get them all back, then the likelihood is your banner's not working right. Okay, and then we might want to optimize our banner, and we'll talk a lot more about how do we do best practice of optimizing them next week. Okay, so next week we're going to talk about testing them and optimizing them. So we're going to have a look at what it means in terms of making sure they're working, but also how to get the best bang for buck out of your banners without them being a compliance burden. So how do we make sure that you don't lose your marketing segment in countries where maybe you don't need to, for example?